What if nothing is wrong with you except the belief that something is? We spend our whole lives trying to become someone better. Yet, we forget that we are already a part of natural intelligence. There is nothing to fix, nothing to prove, only the need to wake up from the dream that we are lacking something. And in the moment you stop running, you, whole and complete, begin to appear. Have you ever felt exhausted trying to become a better version of yourself? There are days when you repeat the same old behaviors. Then blame yourself for not progressing, for still getting angry, still reacting, still letting a single sentence shatter your heart. We often believe that change is something we must do, a process we must control, a goal we must reach. But perhaps change does not come from trying a little harder, but from realizing that you were never something fixed that had to change. You are the change unfolding. Constantly, without needing permission. I once met a man in his 50s who told me, "I have read books, I have gone to therapy, I have meditated, I have tried mindful breathing, but every time my wife gets angry, I still react like a wounded little boy." He sighed and asked, "Why can't I change?" I looked into his eyes and said, "Maybe you do not need to change anything more. Maybe what you call a reaction is actually an opportunity to pause, not to do things differently, but to see yourself more clearly. Change is not a destination. It is a living process. And the very moment you observe yourself reacting, that is already change unfolding. We are taught that to become better people, we must do something new. We must build a habit, break another, set goals, learn to control emotions, practice positive thinking, behave maturely. But rarely does anyone tell us that what truly transforms us is not an outer action, but a subtle shift inside, where we begin to no longer believe so deeply in the story we once told. When you say, "I am hot-tempered, I am fearful, I live too much for others," it is those very labels that keep you locked in the old image of yourself. And so, every time you try to change, you start from that same outdated self. You are trying to add color to a painting you already decided was gray. You see, people can become excellent performers. They can learn to smile politely, say kind words, do the right thing. But there is a profound difference between acting as if you are good and actually being good from within. A person who helps an elderly person cross the street because it is the right thing to do is not quite the same as someone who does it without a second thought. Simply because kindness rises naturally like breath. A person can learn to control anger, but deep inside, they are still battling it, like someone bracing themselves to keep the door from bursting open. But another person might no longer need to control anything, because anger is no longer a constant presence within them. They no longer react, not because they are good at restraint, but because there is nothing inside them left to flare up when triggered. And that is what few people realize. True change does not come from action, but from a state of being. You cannot act out a new version of yourself. You must become it. And becoming is a process that happens little by little. As you begin to look inward without judgment, when you stop trying to make yourself better, and instead start listening to the parts of you you once believed were broken. When you stop asking, "How do I stop getting angry?" and start asking, What inside me needs to be seen? What pain is so deep that this reaction keeps replaying itself? One day, you will find yourself in a situation that used to shake you. And this time, you do not react, not because you forced yourself, but because you are no longer controlled by it. You will look back and realize you have changed. But the beautiful thing is, you never planned for that change. It happened as a natural consequence of beginning to live truthfully with yourself. Campbell once said, "What matters is not that you act kindly, but that you are kind. And true kindness cannot be programmed, does not come from writing notes in a journal or finishing a book. It comes from a state of being where you are no longer driven by fear, by ego, by the beliefs you once thought were you. And when you live from that place, you will see something very peaceful. You no longer need to try to change, because change has always been happening. From the moment you began to look honestly at yourself, without rushing to fix, like a river that does not need to force itself to flow. It simply lets the water move. I used to think logic was the light, the most powerful weapon humans possess to distinguish truth from falsehood, right from wrong, should from should not. Our intellect, after thousands of years of evolution, has built cities, created systems of law, and designed technologies that reach down to the subatomic level. But there is something very few people realize until everything in life starts to fall apart. That is, logic is not always the key. And sometimes it is the intellect itself that becomes the most subtle barrier, preventing you from touching what is truly alive inside. I remember once talking to a young man, a PhD in mathematics, who lived by reasoning and analysis. He told me that he could no longer feel love. All his relationships ended in deadlock. Every time an emotion arose, he would analyze it, dissect it, like a math problem, trying to understand its cause, origin, and psychological motivations. But the more he tried to understand, the more alienated he felt from himself. And I said to him something simple. Maybe what you are looking for is not in your head, but in a place you have never allowed yourself to listen to. Intellect is excellent at drawing conclusions, but intuition is what grasps the full picture. You cannot analyze a piece of music and still feel its beauty. You cannot use logic to feel the warmth in the eyes of someone quietly looking at you. And you cannot interrogate the question of life's meaning through a mind map. The deepest things in life do not appear in the voice of reason, but in the silence between the words. Intuition does not shout. It whispers. And because we are so used to the noise of thought, we have lost the ability to hear that quiet wisdom. Thomas Campbell called it the difference between intellect and data from a greater consciousness. When you live purely by reason, you are like a driver at night who can only see a short stretch ahead with the headlights. But intuition is the sky, the ability to sense things you have no words for, yet intuition does not give you formulas, but it leads you in the right direction. That is why sometimes you walk into a room and feel that something is off, even though everything on the surface seems perfect. Or you meet someone and immediately feel that caution is needed, even without a clear reason. Then later, you discover your intuition was right. The problem is, we are trained to believe only in what can be measured, verified, and proven from a young age. We are praised for being good at math. good at reasoning, good at debate, but no one teaches us to trust our invisible feelings. No one tells us that learning to listen to ourselves is a deeper kind of intelligence than any analytical model. And so intuition is dismissed as emotional, vague, unscientific. But in fact, it is the most primal, most powerful tool humans have ever possessed to live in harmony with themselves and the world. You might argue, if I live entirely by feeling, I will make impulsive and mistaken decisions. That is true. Intuition is not immune to error. But the difference is, an intuition cultivated in stillness, in observation, in listening to oneself, becomes more accurate and insightful over time. Like a muscle, it needs to be used to grow strong. But when you neglect it too long, the intellect will take over and slowly suffocate this ability. And at that point, you are no longer truly alive. You are merely processing choices like an emotional computer. When I was younger, I used to make important life decisions using comparison charts, pros and cons columns, and logical evaluations. But the decisions that brought me to love, to deep transformation, to great turning points, all began from a very subtle feeling, a sense, a gentle leaning inside, a very quiet voice whispering, try this. And each time I followed it, even without certainty, I felt more alive. Campbell said that intuition is the doorway to the greater self. And the irony is, you cannot force yourself to believe in it through reasoning. You can only feel it when the intellect agrees to step aside, when you allow yourself not to need a reason for everything. This does not mean you ignore logic, but that you let logic and intuition dance together. Sometimes intellect leads, sometimes intuition leads, but if you let intellect control every step, you will never step out of the box of what is already known. Intellect needs data, but life does not always give you enough data, and in the gap between that data is where intuition rises, not to replace thinking, but to complete it, not to eliminate reason, but so that you are not limited by it. Because if you live only by intellect, you will always ask, what is right? But if you live by intuition, you will ask, what is true? And sometimes, what is true cannot be explained. It can only be lived. Try sitting still. No need to think. No need to reason. Just gently ask a question and let the answer come without forcing it. You will see that a part of you has always known for a long time, and the only thing holding you back is the familiar voice in your head, whispering that it is not certain enough, but maybe it is. You just have not yet dared to trust the still part within you, where all true direction always begins, not in noise, but in presence. There is a strange paradox in the human mind, which is that we both fear and nurture fear. We do not realize that we are the ones laying each brick to build the prison we are trapped in. And then we look for someone to blame, circumstances to point fingers at, the past to excuse ourselves. But the truth is often much simpler. You are not just afraid, you are recreating that fear over and over through the way you see the world, see others, and see yourself. I once spoke with a woman who said she was always hurt by the people closest to her. She said that anyone she trusted would eventually turn their back, abandon her, or hurt her, and each time it happened, she would close off more, become more guarded, scrutinize every little gesture of others. She believed this was how she protected herself. But the more she did so, the more others felt they were not trusted, not welcomed, and the relationship would collapse again, not because people were truly bad, but because she was living out the narrative that everyone could hurt her. And unconsciously, she behaved as if that was bound to happen. And it did. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a mindset. It is the way you automatically interpret the neutral events of life through a negative lens. Someone does not reply to your message. You assume they dislike you. Someone does not smile. You think you must have done something wrong. You walk down the street and notice a glance, and your mind instantly wonders what judgment is being made. And each time that happens, you reinforce a world where you are always at fault, never good enough, always being watched and ready to be rejected. That is not the truth. That is the habit of fear. Thomas Campbell once told a very simple example. A man lived in New York City but was always afraid of wild elephants. He believed they were hiding everywhere. When he saw wind rustling the trees, he imagined it was an elephant lurking. When he saw a puddle on the sidewalk, he guessed it came from an elephant's footprint. Every neutral sign was interpreted in the same way, to confirm the fear. And the strange thing was, he saw real elephants, not because they existed, but because fear made him see evidence everywhere. That is how the mind works. When it is ruled by unexamined fear, you might think, how could I create something I do not want? Why would I intentionally hurt myself? But you are not doing it on purpose. You are simply repeating what is familiar. The human mind prefers predictability, even when it is painful. Fear brings a sense of familiarity, and familiarity makes you feel as though you are in control. A painful but predictable emotion is sometimes safer than a joy you have never been allowed to experience. And what is more subtle is that when you are afraid something will happen, you do not just worry, you start to act as if it has already happened, is happening, or will happen soon. A person afraid of betrayal becomes controlling. A person afraid of abandonment becomes clingy. A person afraid of being disrespected tries to prove they are superior. And all of those behaviors, though they come from a desire to protect oneself, are precisely what make the feared outcome more likely. Not because fate is cruel, but because you acted to confirm that storyline from the very start. You live inside the house of thoughts you have never dared to question. And each day you lay another brick by reacting from old fear. You think you are trying to escape fear, but in truth, you are protecting it as part of your identity. Because if I am no longer afraid, then who am I? If I am no longer angry, what will I say? If I no longer need to defend myself, will I be hurt? And because you do not know the answer, you return to what is familiar, even if it hurts. I once asked myself, is there any way to step out of this invisible prison? And the answer did not come from some advanced psychological strategy. It came from a very ordinary moment. Someone said something that upset me. My first reaction was to defend, to argue, to get angry. But that time, I just paused for a second. I asked, why does this hurt? And the answer was not about the other person. It was because I was still believing something old. that I was not good enough, that I was easily dismissed, that I always had to be correctly understood. It was that belief being triggered, not the truth. And in that moment, I was no longer angry. I felt sad, but not sad because of them. Sad, because I had lived with that belief for so long without realizing it. From that moment on, I began to change the way I asked questions. Instead of asking why others hurt me, I asked what inside me is ready to be healed. Instead of asking why the world keeps letting me down, I asked, am I seeing the world through fear-tinted lenses? And then I realized change does not come from getting rid of fear. It comes from facing it without avoidance. Fear does not disappear because you ignore it. It disappears when you understand that it is a small part of you that was once hurt, once unheard, once had to brace itself to survive. And when you step out of the old role, when you no longer need to protect fear like a shield, you will see that you can live much more lightly. No need to always be on guard. No need to always be right. No need to build high walls anymore, because nothing is threatening you now. That house is now empty, and you are free. One of the most subtle games invented by the ego is turning the spiritual journey into a competition. You meditate to become peaceful, to control the mind, to evolve, to reach a higher state that you assume you do not yet have. But in the very moment you set a goal for stillness, you have already lost it. Stillness is not a reward. It is the foundation that is always present. Only you are too busy trying to reach it, to realize you are already standing on it. Many people come to meditation because they want to reduce stress. They want to quiet the noisy mind, to find peace, or even to awaken. But think about it. If you approach a friend only to get something from them, is that true friendship? Meditation is the same. When you sit down to take something from it, you are not really sitting down. You are bargaining with the present moment. One day, while walking through a garden, I saw a man meditating under a tree. His face was tense, sweat on his forehead, lips tightly pressed. It looked like he was trying to reach some state, but the more I looked, the more he seemed to be wrestling with himself, as if sitting in silence, but mentally racing with his own idea of what meditation should be. That is not meditation. That is straining in silence. Meditation, if it must be defined, does not lie in body position, in breathing techniques, or in how many minutes you sit. Meditation is the absence of force. It is not running from the present, not trying to mold a beautiful state, not forcing yourself to be still. Meditation is when you stop all the wanting for things to be different. And in that very stopping, you find you are already where you need to be. Thomas Campbell spoke of something called point consciousness, a state where there is no longer a sense of body or thought, only pure presence. But that is not something you can chase. It comes like sleep, only when you stop seeking it. There is a beautiful paradox in meditation, which is that when you sit down for nothing at all, what you truly need may arise, not because you forced it, but because you no longer block it.
Did you know you can get a $1 million life insurance policy for your kids for just $50 a month? One of my clients did this for her daughter when she was young, and now at 25 years old, her premium is still only $50 a month. Plus, it includes living benefits she can use while she's alive. Start while you're young and healthy to lock in low rates for life. DM me info or text 910-447-6508 to see how affordable this can be for your family.